speakers who are not with us at the moment will be. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our reflection and discussion on Dr. King's legacy, voting rights, and citizen action. We have a tradition each King Day, which more often have been in person and not the last 2 years, of reflecting at the end of the projects, the initiatives, the citizen action, to talk about Dr. King's legacy, why we choose to engage in the kind of efforts we do in honor of that legacy, to talk about what is needed on an ongoing basis to make change. And last year, when the pandemic broke out, we moved it to a virtual format, as we are doing today. I've been saying to people, the advantage of doing this virtually is we got a bigger turnout and no one has to show up at a location. We can all be together in a safe space. So that's why we are here. We're delighted to have everyone with us. I've been saying that today is not merely a celebration. It's an opportunity to make Dr. King's legacy of fighting for racial and social justice our mission too, not just today, but every day, each and every day. And the highest form of active citizenship, of course, is the right to vote. Let's face it, too many don't vote. And at the same time, we know that this fundamental right is under attack. We know that federal legislation in 2013 undermined the 1965 Voting Rights Act, that 19 states have enacted 34 restrictive laws. And everybody knows this week, as we were waiting anxiously to find out whether there would be a carve out on the filibuster to allow a vote on the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. And obviously on the heels of the year anniversary of January 6th, we are facing an uncertain future. So that's why today, around the Philadelphia area, we had upwards of 12 or more voter registration and education sites to kick off an ongoing campaign. And I just want to thank Senator Vincent Hughes and City Commissioner Omar Sabir and for their staffs and a committee for working on this effort. And so we are fortunate to have 5 panelists. I'll just tell you who they are. Each will have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Please use the chat to ask questions or offer comments. And then I will turn it over to Senator Hughes, who will facilitate after everyone has a chance to speak. I would just go tell you who we will be hearing from. The first is our Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey, who has been very vocal on the need to pass these 2 bills, and spoke. There is Senator Casey, and has been certainly was very vocal about it this morning during our opening ceremony at Girard College. I mentioned State Senator Vincent Hughes, who has been a real champion on voting rights, most recently around the 2020 election, but continues to lead the charge. Philadelphia City Commissioner Omar Sabir, who was with us, was elected in 2019, and he has had a principal focus of empowering, enabling Philadelphians to participate in the voting process. Not sure if Barbara Armwine is with us yet. She is president and founder of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and has for decades been a voting rights activist. I first knew her going back to when I was an international election observer in South Africa in 1994, when she headed the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. And then rounding out the group, Khadija Kenner is the founding executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project, voting rights organization modeled after the very successful New Georgia Project founded by Stacey Abrams in 2014. So with that, each panelist, as I mentioned, will have 5 minutes for opening remarks. Then Senator Hughes will facilitate the conversation. Senator Casey, would you like to lead off?
Yeah, Todd, thanks very much. And I want to thank you for this additional opportunity beyond our gathering this morning, because it's both an inspiration to me that we have so many people that are working daily and laboring in the vineyards, as they say in the scriptures, not only to protect voting rights, but to lift people up, especially at a terribly difficult time for the country. But on voting rights, I'll just offer a couple of comments. The work that folks on this call are doing, whether it's Senator Hughes or Commissioner Sabir or Khadija or Barbara, and you as well, Todd, and all those who are listening today and part of this dialogue, the work that you're all doing on so many issues, but in particular on voting rights, is of great consequence. And obviously we have decisions to make and work to do this week in the United States Senate, but we haven't voted yet, and I'm not going to give up until we're done. So it's possible, at this stage, not likely, but possible, that we can both put a spotlight on how people vote in the Senate, but also to actually get to a conclusion that is successful. If we don't this week, then we're going to continue to work on this, because it is foundational to who we are as Americans. And this is not a theoretical threat. This is a direct threat to democracy, where voters are being targeted by political operatives all over the country, because some people are having trouble getting majorities, so they're going to try to pick their voters instead of having the voters pick them. That's just the truth, and I know that some people would rather not engage in political back and forth, but that's just the reality of what we're talking about. This is a deliberate, concerted effort to prevent some people from voting. I think what will happen, though, is if they're successful, they won't just prevent Black Americans or others in communities of color from voting. Ultimately, what's going to happen is maybe some folks that there weren't the direct targets of these efforts will also be have their votes, their right to vote compromised. I'm certain of that. So this is going to be a much larger group of Americans that will be adversely impacted if they're successful. But here's the good news. The good news is the Freedom to Vote Act isn't just designed to thwart those efforts that are contrary to our democracy, that are in furtherance of the big lie about last year's election. It's a lot more than that, and we should celebrate and be affirmative or affirm and lift up what's in this bill. This bill is a bill to clear a pathway for people to vote. Why would we ever go back to those days when you could only vote on one day of the year for a number of hours for a general election? We proved in Pennsylvania this works, that if you can get a record turnout in a pandemic, imagine the number of people who vote when we don't have a pandemic. That was as plain as anything after the 2020 election. We've never had that before in Pennsylvania. Never. Since 1960 has the number gone up as high as it did. It never goes up in a re-election for a president, but it did this time. We went from 6.1 million people voting in 16 to 6.9. 800,000 more people voted because we had mechanisms in place for people to vote early or to vote by mail. So these provisions work. We will have higher turnout in our future, not just in a presidential election, but in every election. We can get voter turnout up because we're providing, if we pass this bill, national standards so that more people can vote. So my point is that this is more than just stopping bad things from happening, and they are really bad. It's about lifting up the right to vote in a very affirmative way. And so I want to thank all of you for making it possible. For those of us who have the opportunity to cast a vote in the United States Senate or the Senate of Pennsylvania or any legislative body, to have an opportunity to do that, but also to be able to work with you to get make sure the right to vote is protected. And I can't think of a better way to celebrate and validate the good work that Dr. King did on this day.
Thank you, Senator Casey. Thank you for your work on this critical issue, and especially in the Senate, as all eyes of the nation are focused on your body of 100 people. Let's go next to Philadelphia City Commissioner Omar Sabir.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you for doing this work that you're doing. Again, my name is City Commissioner Omar Sabir. I'm one of 3 commissioners that oversee the election functions in Philadelphia County. So what does that mean? It means the 2020 election, me and my colleagues and I had officiated the election. My life has been threatened, so has my colleagues. To this day, we still receive death threats. But we're not going to stop. We're not going to let that intimidate us. And if we look at the life of Dr. King, I want to just yield just a little bit of my time just to remember Dr. King. He was 39 years old. He graduated from Morehouse College, taught over at Crozier Theological Center, and he finished his education up in Boston University. He was assassinated at the age of 39. 39 years old, it's very young. And one of the things that he said, a couple of quotes, and this speech is from What's Your Life Blueprint. And we have to really examine what's our blueprint. Where exactly are we going to be going? I mean, it's just going to be that we just, on this one day, that we just remember Dr. King? Or do we take the influence and the lessons from his life, and do we move forward? And one of the quotes that he said was to encourage us to have a deep belief in your dignity. Know your worth, know that you're significant, and don't be ashamed who you are. And when we're talking about people voting or not voting, a lot of people feel as though they don't belong inside of this society, that their vote doesn't count, and that's the reason why a lot of people don't vote. The number one defense to voting rights, or someone trying to take your votes away from you, is to actually vote. So we have to exercise this right that so many people sacrifice, from Octavius Cotto to Medgar Evers to so many more countless people. And when we talk about people suppressing our vote, we're talking about policies that affected us. Of course, there are policies that are being talked about today by a lot of the state legislators across the country. But we have to remember that not too long ago, people were forced to poll tax. With this poll tax, that was about a month's worth of your salary. There were also people who actually were killed. There were also people who actually lost their jobs, literally, to vote. They were threatened. There were people that your reputation was ruined. And then people had to walk miles to go vote, to walk to a location to vote. And after they walked 2 or 3 miles to vote, they were told that they had to walk back to the same location they just came back from. Or maybe you have to walk another 2 or 3 miles. It was rough. I mean, so we came a long way, but even in the midst of all that, voter turnouts were 60%, 70% regular elections in those areas. So they kept on fighting. they kept on working and they kept on voting. So we have to make sure that all the freedoms that we have, you can vote. We're here in Pennsylvania, pretty much anyone can vote. If you've been convicted of a crime, and once you have left your incarceration, you can still vote. You actually can vote while you're incarcerated unless you're convicted of a felony. So you can vote in the comfort of your own home, or you could vote in person. And real quick, I just wanted to give 3 dates to everyone. On May the 2nd is the voter registration deadline in Pennsylvania. May the 10th, 5 p.m. sharp is the deadlines. If you're planning on voting by mail, you have to have it in our hand, the application, if that's the way you want to vote. And then May 17th, that's the election day. So you can vote on or before Tuesday, May the 17th. We want you to come out. We want you to vote. Now is our time, and our time is now. The more we vote, the more we get. When we vote, we will receive resources, accountability. And if you need any assistance, please reach out to our city commissioner's office. There are 3 city commissioners, either Commissioner Daly, Commissioner Seth Bluestein, or even Commissioner me, City Commissioner Omar Sabir. And we are there to help you with any of your voting needs. If you have any questions, a lot of questions can be answered if you go to philadelphiavotes.com, philadelphiavotes.com, and get all the accurate information that you need. And just remember, the Philadelphia elections are safe, simple, and secure, and they always have been. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is Barbara Arnwine with us yet? Campbell, do you see Barbara?
I do not.
Okay. Let's move to our next panelist, Kadita Kenner.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Global Citizen. Thank you, Senator Hughes, for having me today. Good to see all of you out there on Zoom today. I wish we could be in person, but we'll take Zoom for now. My name is Kadita Kenner. I'm the founding executive director of the New Pennsylvania Project. We are a voting rights organization with a primary purpose of voter registration. In Pennsylvania, we have 1.1 million Pennsylvanians who are eligible to vote, yet not registered to vote. And so we have our work cut out for us. And as was mentioned, we are named in homage to the New Georgia Project and the work of Nsé Ufot and Stacey Abrams, who founded the organization back in 2014. In their first year, they were able to register more than 80,000 new voters. We know how important 80,000 voters can be. We know how important 50,000 voters can be. We also know how important 3 voters can be in determining an election. It is our mission to register 50,000 new Pennsylvanians in 2022 ahead of the November general election. And I come to you today as someone who has organized in this state for the last 5 years around trying to protect the independent judiciary, trying to increase the minimum wage here in the Commonwealth, fight for fair funding of our public schools. And as we knock on doors, and we are today, I'm actually just getting back in my home to take this call. We were knocking on doors today in Westchester, Chester County. We're knocking on doors today in Harrisburg, in Monroeville, in Norristown, Montgomery County. We are knocking on doors today to let people know that we're here for them, that we want to listen to their concerns and that we want to register them to vote. We want to bring them into the electorate. We want, for the first time in maybe their 37-year-old life or 49-year-old life, to cast a ballot in an election and inform them that there actually is an election this May. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and we are one organization partnering with lots of other organizations who have been doing this work. But it is our mission to talk to voters 365, not just ahead of an election, not just a few weeks before it's time to cast our ballots, but 365, and be present in these communities and engage them in that way. Hold town halls to talk about issues and register these folks to vote. And we know that those who are most recently registered are the least likely to actually show up to the polls. And so we're going to stay in contact with everyone we register to ensure they're familiar with the dates that are coming up and the ways in which they can cast their ballot. In my previous role as director of campaigns with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, we dealt a lot with policy. And if I'm given a moment here, I'd like to talk about some of the policies that the current legislature in Harrisburg is trying to move through. And I'm talking about gerrymandering the judiciary, House Bill 38, sham commissions set up to take the power away from us as voters to choose our elected officials and put that power back to elected officials to choose their voters. That's House Bill 2207. House Bill 1880, limit terms of sitting judges, ensure they can't run again for office. House Bill 2141, which would change the way in which we vote for retention on judges. It would turn them into partisan elections to run again for office. And we know how much money that takes to run for office and what kind of influence that money could bring to someone running for office. And these aren't just changes that the governor can veto. These are changes to the Pennsylvania Constitution. And this is what we are seeing currently in this moment in Harrisburg, is that when good legislation can't be passed, they find a way to go around the governor's veto pen and bring it to 22% of Pennsylvanians who decide to come out in a primary election to cast their ballot. This is a disturbing trend that we all should know about, because right now that is 4 proposed changes to our Pennsylvania Constitution to change the way that we vote. The Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center has been a great founding place for me to start to kind of get my chops as to what it is that we need to discuss at the door so that we can get people to actually join the electorate. We can do a lot of things, but we can't out-organize voter suppression when those in power have no interest in making access to the ballot more free, fair, or accessible. So there's many things we can do, but that is difficult, which brings me to the communities in which we want to engage, particularly communities of color. I mentioned 1.1 million Pennsylvanians are eligible to vote but not registered. That's 20% of all Black folks who are eligible to vote not registered. 31% of all Latinx folks who are eligible to vote are not registered. 42% of all Asia Pacific Islander folks who are eligible to vote are not registered in the Commonwealth. And don't get me started about the youth vote. Only 1 in 4 high school students who are currently eligible to vote are registered to vote. 25% of high school students who are eligible to vote are registered. We have our work cut out for us. Here I'm joining a group today, Philadelphia, surrounding areas. Only 15% of Philadelphia's high school students who are eligible to vote are registered. Similar numbers in Pittsburgh. So if we're going to lose a generation of voters, if we don't begin to engage these young folks in this political process, a lot of them experiencing what a political life is like for the first time, what it was like to cast a ballot in the midst of a global pandemic, and to see that their families, their community members came out in record numbers in 2020 against all odds and barriers put before them to cast their ballots. Yet to see on TV those who try to disrupt the votes that were decided and overturn those, particularly in communities that have demographics that are larger of communities of color. So we're going to continue to work hard. We're going to talk and have really encouraging conversations, which we are. And so just know that there's something we all can do in this moment. I just mentioned only 1 in 4 high school students who are eligible to vote are registered. That means someone that you know, your niece, your nephew, your grandchild is unregistered in this moment. We must bring them into the electorate right now. And we must expand this electorate in order to defend democracy.
Thanks, Kadita. Let's go to Senator Vincent Hughes.
Thanks, Todd, and appreciate everybody for participating in this. I'm going to belay any conversation about myself, because I think that it's important that I know Senator Casey's time frame is tight, and we want to make sure that he gets to his rounds, because his rounds impact the nation. But I'm just going to ask Todd, if you will, I'm just going to ask Senator Casey if there's any updates that he needs to get to us, any action steps that he needs to get to this group so that we can take them on and try to put them in place. Dr. King was obviously a man of service, but action was probably the greatest part of his service quotient. So I want to just ask that, Senator Casey, I know you got limited time. Are there any action steps? Are there any updates that you need us to have with respect to your efforts in Washington right now?
Well, Senator Hughes, thanks so much. I'm reminded as you were asking that question about that line we often refer to of Dr. King, the fierce urgency of now. Now is this week. But I think, as everyone knows, we have 50 votes on the Democratic side for the bill, for the policy. We don't yet have 50 votes for the rule change that allows the policy to pass. That's the difficulty and the complexity of this. But that effort to get those 2 votes is continuing. It will continue to the very last minute. But one scheduling update, which is helpful, I think, is we moved a caucus meeting, which was going to be Wednesday. We moved it up to tomorrow, so we won't just go back tomorrow and begin debate. We'll tomorrow evening we'll have a caucus meeting, and that's when I think we'll be able to continue that effort to persuade just 2 members out of 50 to vote to allow a rule change. And some people are probably scratching their head about this rule because it's been around so long and it's been abused for so many years. And the point that we're trying to make is not just the importance of this one issue of voting rights, but I think a rule change would help get other measures considered, like immigration and like common sense gun measures, not to mention healthcare and all the elements of Build Back Better that you have to do by this budget process that we've been engaged in for that legislation. So changing the rules would be really restoring the Senate to what it used to be. I think the most helpful thing folks can do is to continue to make that case in communities across our state. But of course, making sure that every member of Congress hears it from you, but especially any way that you can deliver a message in both Arizona and West Virginia would be helpful. So if you have cousins in those states, please ask your cousins or friends or people you know to deliver that message, because what we're trying to do is to say, if you want the Senate to be a place where we debate for real and deliberate and consider seriously and then vote on substantive matters, the way it should work is you get almost unlimited time to talk on the Senate floor, and that could take a while on one bill. Voting rights, if we had that rule in place, could take a while, but we could actually get to a conclusion. And then the second thing you get are a lot of amendments. So that's how the Senate should work. If you're in the minority, you have protections that no other legislative minority gets. You get a lot of amendments and you get a lot of debate time. And the debate time could literally be weeks. So if there are Republicans who don't like our voting rights bill, our Freedom to Vote Act, and the John Lewis bill, they ought to have to stand there and tell the world why it doesn't make sense. I don't think they want to do that because it's pretty hard to be standing there for hours talking about how bad it is to vote early. That's not a very good argument to be making, along with other provisions of this bill. The bill is very positive. It helps people vote. It helps older voters vote. It helps all kinds of people to vote. So, but if they want the rights of a minority, a political minority, then they would have that. But the idea that you can just say we want a 60 vote threshold and then go home for the weekend and not do anything. So if you're going to invoke the rules of the Senate to slow something down, you ought to have to earn it. But I think the most important thing is keep making the case up until the minute we vote. And then if depending on what the result of that vote is on the rule change, then we have to continue our work if we're not successful.
Thank you, Senator Casey. Again, we appreciate you. You have been clear. You have been consistent. You and I have been at 3 different events virtually today. All right. And your message has been consistent about your position on the filibuster, your position on the John Lewis Act, your position on the Freedom to Vote Act, and the fact that they've been combined together into one piece. And this is not new ground for you. This is ground that you've been in for a long time throughout your entire career. And we want to appreciate you and make sure you heard it from me and from us collectively. And we thank you for it, sir. And you have your greatest obligation is to go get the rest of those votes. So, you know, this is the choir and you have sung to us. So we're straight. Okay. All right. You've already preached to us. So we don't need the message. So you go get those votes and we'll be good. All right.
And thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
God bless your work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. So just as a interlude here, we were scheduled to hear from Barbara Arnwine, who is the founder and executive director of the Transformative Justice Coalition, and for 25 years headed the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Like I said, for a quarter of a century, headed that very important organization, which in the end wound up training a number of the voting rights legal scholars all across the country. But unfortunately, Barb is having to tend to her mother, we just got the text, who had a severe stroke yesterday. And so she's handling that business, and we are, yes, Andrea, yes. And we are, she's handling that business, but she's trained us up for us to handle this business, so that she can go ahead and focus on that. And we want to make sure that she handles that without any fear of having to worry about getting on this call. And so our prayers are with Barbara and her mom and their family. And let's just keep her focused as she deals with that very significant piece of business. I'm going to take the liberty, Todd, you gave me the mic or the laptop, whatever you want to call it. All right. To kind of run this, and I'm going to take the liberty. I think it's important that as we Omar, Commissioner Sabir has given some sense of what's going on in Philadelphia, and how really great things ran in the last election, and what we need to be thinking about locally. Khadija has talked about their efforts across the state, and especially I really want to emphasize the importance of registering young people to vote, high school students who are eligible, old enough to vote, but have chosen not to register, old enough to register, but have chosen not to do so. And I know she's working very closely with Angie Hinton from Pennsylvania PA Youth Votes, who came up with a great saying yesterday. Everybody needs to write this one down. If your feet are on the street, you can vote. Custis, you can use that one. If your feet are on the street, you can vote. And that was a good one. I like that one. And I told Angie that don't copyright it because it's already out in the universe. If your feet are on the street, you can vote. And so we know about that effort. We're going to come back to that to help encourage that. But there's a lot that's going on at the state level. And I want to make sure that one of our leading election lawyers here in Pennsylvania, and also has a bit of a national footprint as well, Kevin Greenberg, gives us a bit of an update about what it is that we need to be paying attention to from a legal perspective here in Pennsylvania. Kevin, thanks for joining us, young man.
Thank you, Senator.
Tell us what we need to know so that we can take action. But before you do that, I was going to give you the mic and then take it away. All right. Everybody needs to write this phone number down. 202-224-3121. 202-224-3121. That is the switchboard for the United States Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. You can call any senator that you want to call. You don't have to just call the Pennsylvania senators. Leave Bob Casey alone. He's fine. He's in good position. His colleague, Senator Toomey, not so much. He deserves a phone call. But you can call any senator in the nation through that number and register your concern about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act, to make sure that they handle their business. And there's obviously the concern of focusing on West Virginia and focusing on Arizona. I got that. But there's a whole bunch of other states who are in the process of suppressing the vote by not supporting those matters that deserve attention, 202-224-3121. I'm gonna be running that number throughout the conversation and need it posted in the chat. Let's make sure we get that done. Kevin, it's all yours, sir. Sorry about that, man, but I just had to get the message. You know,
Absolutely no problem.
Message.
Absolutely no problem. And since Khadija talked a lot about the state constitutional law changes that are ridiculous and need to be stopped, and frankly, we're counting on you guys to try to get that stopped in the legislature. I know that's going to be a harder fight this cycle, but next cycle it might be better. You may have better footwork between you and hopefully by then Speaker McClinton. But we will deal with those issues then. But I want to talk about the context of that into what comes into Pennsylvania right now. So we talked a little about the Voting Rights Act, and I know Todd, when he started with the 2013 decision in Shelby County that gutted Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, which was pre-clearance. We then had another decision in July of last year, guys, it's weird, July of 2021, called Rinovich, which was an Arizona case that gutted Section 2, except with respect to redistricting. And so right now, the only place the Voting Rights Act really is relevant anymore is in the redistricting process. And that is exactly where we find ourselves today in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to talk real quickly about the three processes that are sort of going on because we do the congressional process separate from the House and the Senate, the State House and the Senate process. And that's sort of where we're going for right now. And it is clear, thank God for this, that from a 1986 case called Thornburg versus Gringles, that Section 2 does play in the voting in the redistricting context, and that is why it is there today. So let's start with the State House map. Right now, we have a State House map that was proposed by the Legislative Redistricting Commission on a 3-2 vote. The chairman, Norberg, who was appointed by the Supreme Court, voted with the two Democrats to pass that map. That is a map that is better than the old one has been. It is slightly fairer. It is not yet fair. It needs to be better, but it is much better than it was. So you understand the way this works. Pennsylvania in the last decade has added about 800,000 people. Now we've also added about 860,000 voters of color, so people of color. So what does that tell me? The white population has shrunk a little bit, let alone not grown as much. And the Black, the Latino, and the Asian populations have grown dramatically. So one would think that with 860,000 new voters of color, we would have 10 or 12 more minority districts. Now, that's not exactly possible because minority voters don't live in an isolated cluster. So it's more spread out, and so it's a little bit of a dynamic. But what seems to have happened with this new map is we have probably 3 new Latino districts, which is, I think, a very strong step. We went from having 3 historically, we're going to likely have 6 Hispanic districts. Danilo Burgos, who is Latino, doesn't represent a Latino district right now. He represents a Black Latino hybrid. And Peter Schweier, who is a white guy, represents a Latino district historically. But we're going to likely end up with 6 Latino majority districts. We're also going to have 1 new Black district in Philadelphia, it looks like, but not many more elsewhere. Some of that is the clustering effect and it's the function of it, but some of it was that this was not a high enough priority in the drawing of these maps. But the House map is vastly better than the Senate map, which only creates 1 new minority district, and it's a Latino district outside Lancaster County. And to my way of thinking, and again, Senator Hughes, I know you had some minimal say, but not very much in this, but I respectfully, the biggest problem with the Senate map is that the law allows districts to be 10% larger or 10% smaller than the ideal size. And what ended up happening with the map is all the districts in the west and the north part of the state are 10% smaller, about 5%, 6% smaller than the ideal size. So they have actually more seats per people than the ones in the southeast and the Lehigh Valley, which have 6 or 7%, 8% more than the idealized size. And so as a result, what ended up being a map that was probably more about incumbency than equality, but ended up any one district being 5% small seems reasonable. It might make sense to keep a community of interest together. But when you do it across the whole state, what you really do is you're shifting representation from the largely diverse southeast and Lehigh Valley to the, let's put it this way, largely white west and central part of the state. And so one of the things I think the window is still open for comments push back on the members of the LRC. That's the leaders of each of the bodies. So Joanna McClinton, Jay Costa, Kerry Benninghoff, Kim Ward, and then the chairman Nordberg. They're going to have to vote on this map relatively soon, and then the process will move to the state court. Would push on them to more equalize the size of the districts across the state. And if that means picking up one district from the west and moving it to the east, where we somehow end up with somebody of color in that district, instead of having everybody, every African-American member of the Senate representing 15,000 more people than the white members do, would be a useful thing to do. And I think from a partisan standpoint, I, as the lawyer for Democrats, feels that way. But as a lawyer who believes in voting rights as just an American, it's also something that's important. The third process is a little more complicated because it's the congressional map, and we are going from 18 seats to 17 seats right now. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania did not grow as much as our neighbor states, and we lost one seat. In the process of doing this, we're going to lose one seat, but we're also going to change the boundaries for every other seat. And historically, Pennsylvania has had one member of color in the body, whether it's Dwight Evans now, it was Shaka Fatah before him. We've had for some length of time one black member of Congress. I guess it was Lucian Blackwell before Shaka. We've also had a second district traditionally in Philadelphia until 2018, where it was a black majority district that had historically elected a white guy, Bob Brady of late. When the Supreme Court redrew the maps in 2018, that didn't quite hold true. And now we have a chance to redraw these districts. And so there are three districts that I want to talk about where pressure on your legislators could make a difference. One is Dwight's district. It needs to stay majority black for Voting Rights Act compliance. And I think that's done. And I don't think there's any real concern about that, but it's a point to stress hold. And I say that Dwight, like Vincent, were my plaintiffs in the 2020 Voting Rights Act case. And we were proud to support you two and Senator Street and everybody else who was involved in that process. But they've been stalwart fighters for voting rights, and we want to protect that. The second seat is the one in Allegheny County, where until recently, there were only two candidates running to succeed Mike Doyle, and both happened to be black. One was Summer Lee, who comes out of the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. And one was a guy named Jerry Dickinson, who's much more of what I would call a pragmatic progressive, although that's it. Now there's a third guy, a white guy named Steve Irwin, who was running for lieutenant governor, who's gone into this. What that district looks like, what the shape of that district looks like, whether we crack Pittsburgh in half, is going to largely determine, I think, whether we elect somebody like Ed Gainey, who comes from a progressive white and black community together as a member of Congress from Pittsburgh, or we end up with somebody like Mike Doyle, who's been a great congressman and a stalwart liberal, but very much a white Irish machine politician. And so the question is, what this district will look like is whether Summer or Jerry or Steve comes out of this, and that process is ongoing. The Supreme Court will eventually make the decision unless the legislature can do so in the next 2 weeks. The legislature is trying, and I'll leave it to Vincent to talk more about that. But the Commonwealth Court has given us a requirement that every party introduce a map every part of the litigation introduce a map a week from today into the litigation, and then the court will a week later pick from that after we go through a fairly rushed process. The third seat that I want to talk about is the one that was the Bob Brady seat, is now the Brendan Boyle seat, whatever you want to call it, but the second Philadelphia seat. It could easily be a majority minority seat with a vastly overwhelming 65-70% minority population. Or it could be pulled into Bucks County the way the governor's map does, which makes it whiter and does some things to decrease the minority population in that district. However we draw that map will, I think, determine whether or not that seat is a black or a white seat, or what it likely will be is either a majority minority seat that elects a white guy, or a majority white seat that may or may not elect somebody of color. The beauty of Philadelphia is, as we've seen with Larry Krasner, that race is no longer a straight line driver for communities' interest in who the candidates are. But on the other hand, it's still an issue. And so the process that's going on in the legislature to craft a map, the legislature has it entirely within its authority to do this map without the court's involvement. The courts have said, if you don't do it by January 31st, we're going to take it over. So, and they've started the process to be ready to do so on the 31st. We've got 2 more weeks for the Senate to adopt a map. The House has already passed one that's unacceptable, but the vehicle's there. The Senate could adopt a map. Now, that's a long way of getting to what's going on in Pennsylvania, but is for the next 2 weeks, it's about redistricting. Talk to your state reps, talk to your state senators. They control the congressional process. And they, through their leadership, have influence on the state legislative process. And so everybody here who has a feeling on this should say something about this. And from a voting rights perspective, it's important that the populations of all these districts, including the state Senate and state House ones, be as close to equal as possible. On the congressional ones, even though they're allowed 0.25% under federal law, everybody seems to be aiming for exact equality, plus or minus 1 voter. That is doable if you redraw the voting precincts in a couple of places along the way, and that's likely to happen. That's maybe not exactly to 1 voter, but maybe within 1% instead of 10% might be the right target for our state legislative maps. But talking about that, because that will shift power from the West and the center to the East and the South and to Lehigh Valley. And frankly, when you do that, by its nature and by where these people live, we're going to get a better diverse representation that more is in line with the population of the state, which is 36% minority at this point. And that's not what our representation is in House, in the state Senate, or in Congress.
So what, Kevin, thank you very much. The area that you covered is extremely, extremely important. The whole process of redistricting, just to build off of a little bit of what you said, and I can't thank you enough for getting to that level of detail. Legislative maps, state rep, state senate maps are drawn by the Legislative Reapportionment Commission, which is made up of the 4 caucus leaders and the chair, which is appointed by the state Supreme Court. In this case, the chair is Nordenberg, who was from the University of Pittsburgh, used to be chancellor for the University of Pittsburgh. And so that commission has to make its decision. We believe that commission will release its final results for the state rep and the state senate seats. We believe the commission will release its final results the end of January. I'm going to ballpark it and say January 28th. And then that will become public. You can go to the Legislative Reapportionment Commissions and see their designs of the preliminary map that came out on December 16th. And you can see all of the public meetings, all of the public conversation, all of the testimony from the thousands of people and the thousands and thousands of hours that have been provided from all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. If you go to their website, and if someone could dig up that website, we'll be glad to post it in the chat. That's the legislative stuff. The congressional stuff is done by legislation, all right? That's the bill passed in the House, passed in the Senate, governor signs off to it. As you know, 10 years ago, or 6 or 7 years ago, depending upon how you want to count it, that process was not successful. The state Supreme Court interceded and wound up drawing the congressional maps. And as Kevin has indicated, we may, if we fail to do that legislatively, more than likely the state Supreme Court will do that process again, as it's kind of set up the legal footwork to allow it to do so. This is the penultimate of politics in the political process. It happens at the highest level. This is my 4th time around doing this, and it really does require public attention and public engagement and public involvement. So Kevin, again, thank you so very much for giving us that rundown. That was an extremely, extremely, extremely important piece. One piece I would add to it, the issue of deviation. You'll hear this phrase over the next couple of weeks. In the legislative maps, in the House and the Senate maps, you're allowed a broader wiggle room on a district. A district is supposed to be, let's say, 250,000. You can add an extra percentages here over, extra percentages here under that 250,000 number to get the statewide maps on Senate districts. On congressional districts, every district must be down to the one. They must be even, and maybe one vote or one person over or under. Makes congressional map drawing much more difficult than legislative map drawing. I don't want to go too far into this because we can get down the rabbit hole and talk forever about it, but it is important that we need to continue to pay attention to it.
Senator Hughes, can I say one more thing just to add to, you talked about the website, the legislative redistricting website. It's perfect. I'll get that and send it over for a second. Anybody who wants to go down the rabbit hole even further, there's an expert that the House Democrats presented on January 7th named Matt Barretto, Barreto. His expert report does a very nice job talking about voting rights and minority impact and what that means for vote shares as you go forward. And so of all the experts, and there's a lot of them, the leadership team has done a very good job of putting all this stuff in, but Dr. Barretto's report is, I think, a very good one for understanding this issue for those who want to follow Senator Hughes and I down the rabbit hole.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that. Very important conversation. Kadita, you were on the street today. I'm calling on you, Kadita. You were on the street today, and you've come off the street and you've had your coffee, your tea, or whatever like that. All right. What is it? You warmed up, okay? Hopefully you warmed up. All right. You warmed up. Tell us what the people are saying to you about voting, and tell us what the most successful message has been that you've been able to utilize to convince folks to vote. Tell us.
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, we have been on the streets since this organization was founded in May, and we spent a lot of time this summer running up to Election Day in November, talking to folks, particularly in the Norristown area. And the conversations that we're having in Norristown or McKeesport or Carlisle are very similar. And these folks have the same issues. We're talking to folks and engaging those who are 24, never registered to vote, not interested. 37, 49, never registered to vote, not interested. And so we come to them knocking on their doors, talking about issues, not talking about political parties and talking about political candidates, because I can tell you, Senator, that is not what they want to talk about. They don't want to talk about politics. They want to talk about the issues, although we're trying to connect the fact that our issues are related to politics. That is our mission. And so when we're talking to these folks, they're talking about the fact that they can't get out to vote, even with the vote by mail as an option to them. That is not something they were able to easily access or complete and turn in on time. And so we're having conversations around how they can use vote by mail in order to cast their ballots, particularly because they're working 2 and 3 shift jobs, and 13-hour window on one day of the week is just not enough to get them to cast a ballot. We're talking about the fact that they don't see some of their lives changing for the better, since they last cast a ballot. Some cast a ballot in 2008 and have not done so since. And so we're talking about how policy and making sure that we're getting out there and casting our ballots can bring about the change in our communities. So today I knocked on a lot of doors, particularly of folks who have moved. That's what we're finding right now. We're uncovering the rocks and trying to find out where all these 1.1 million people live who are unregistered to vote. Some language access is an issue. And so thankfully, we're able to talk to folks in languages in which they understand. And so we've been doing a lot of that in particular communities we've been invested in. But what the people want to hear in this moment is that their lives are going to change for the better, and that casting a ballot will actually help them to do that, to see that change. And what has been the most successful conversations we're having at doors to get folks to actually change their mind and cast a ballot for the first time is talking about how they can increase the power in their communities when they come out in record numbers, reminding them that elected officials work for them, and that if they want to see their lives changing for the better, they have to give elected officials, some elected officials, reasons to actually come out and work for them. We have had success in talking about what is happening in their particular community. And so it is our model to knock on doors with someone from that neighborhood, to talk to that person in that neighborhood, because they are the trusted messenger. It's not, it's not good practice for us right now to have folks from Massachusetts or, some other part of the state come into Norristown or come into Fair Hill, right, and talk to these folks about registering to vote. because they're not trusted messengers and they don't know what's really happening on the ground in that neighborhood. And so when I'm knocking on the door in Carlisle, if I didn't know about a nursing home that was being privatized being a big issue because I was with somebody from Carlisle, I'd have a difficult time trying to switch people over to cast a ballot and come out and register to vote. And so talking about the granular things that are happening in communities is what's been successful. But I'm telling you in this moment, Senator Hughes and others, the people that we're engaging are very open to the conversation because they are living in areas in which have not been engaged. They haven't had anyone come knock on their door for many years. You know, I'm going with my list looking for John Doe, and John Doe has been deceased for 5 years, which tells me no one has been knocking on his door to talk about anything of importance in more than 5 years. I'm looking, I have a list. I'm going to 123 Main Street, and 123 Main Street has been burned to the ground, obviously for years. And so we have work to do to make sure that we're able to uncover all these 1.1 million Pennsylvanians who have been left out of the political process, have felt disenfranchised, not only politically due to bad acts like gerrymandering, but functionally. They just don't see themselves being represented in government. They don't feel as though their lives are changing. And so we're trying to change minds and build power in these neighborhoods so they'll actually come out and cast a ballot.
Khadija, you've worked, that's a very good response. You've worked with Angie Hinton and her Pennsylvania Youth Vote. And tell us, if you will, and I know it's hard to represent Angie, okay, because she is a fire all unto herself. Tell us what in your conversations with Angie, what she's been finding with young people.
So Angie is my girl inside of this work and outside of this work. And I am a proud board member of the PA Youth Vote. So I kind of have an understanding of what it is they've been doing and how they've been so successful. They are using student ambassadors to talk to students, just like I mentioned, how it's important to have someone who is the trusted messenger reach out. That is what they're doing. They're having students reach out to students. Yeah, you can have grandmama or you can have mom or dad nag you about, you know, registering to vote or casting a ballot. But when you can hear it from someone who is your peer and why it is important on that level, that's what matters. And I think what PA Youth Vote is doing really well is that they're providing lots of education to the youth. I just talked about the numbers being 1 in 4 eligible high school students are actually registered to vote in this moment, which tells us is that that's not happening in schools. I did a rally earlier today in Delaware County, and they were saying that the schools there won't even allow folks to come in to do voter registration. So we need to make sure that we're able to have these conversations with students in school. The act of voter registration is a nonpartisan act. And so we're getting that pushback from schools saying you can't come in here and do voter registration. That's just not accurate. But what PA Youth Vote is doing so well is educating. You know, students have issues they care about, right? They know what's happening. They can see these things for themselves. They can ride down City Line Avenue and see the education funding of one school on the left-hand side of City Line Avenue and the funding that's received on the right-hand side of City Line Avenue in Lower Merion. They see the discrepancies. They see that it is unjust. We're talking about student loan debt. I mean, a lot of these kids are looking to go to college and will be in student loan debt. Pennsylvania ranking one of the highest in the entire country in terms of student loan debt. Maybe if they were to see a student loan debt be wiped away, that they might be more apt to come out and cast their ballot. So talking about the issues that matter to the youth, educating them about what is happening, what's relative to them in their lives, you know, that is what is moving them to cast ballots. And I can't stress enough how important it is to have the peer-to-peer engagement, because it's just not enough to say your ancestors fought and died for your right to vote to get somebody to get out there and finally become registered. They need to hear it from their peers. And we need to talk about the issues. These younger kids, they are so smart. I mean, whenever I'm having a bad day, I reach out to Angie and I say, can you put me on one of your calls? I want to talk to the youth because they get it. And they understand and they will continue to inspire you. So if you're having a bad day, reach out to the youth and have a conversation with them. They get it. We just need to continue to have conversations with them, not be scared to have conversations with them, and make sure that we're telling the truth because they're open to hear it.
Thank you, Khadija. And I will tell Angie Hinton that you're doing counseling work for her and providing therapy. By talking to teenagers. Most of us would say therapy through your teenagers is not the best option, but I'll let you have that. And I'm gonna call on and folks should probably, Todd, I'm gonna suggest folks should put questions in the chat, and then we'll try to try to knock those off through the chat process. Andrea Custis, I see, has joined us. The Urban League was in full effect today at a number of the voter registration sites that we did through Jeff, most of them through Jeff Brown's ShopRights and Fresh Grocers. And got to thank Jeff once again for opening up his store to the community so that we could stage our voter registration efforts there. Andrea, you had the Urban League in full force out today. Again, thank you for that. I'm gonna go back again to the question I asked Khadija about what moves people. It's that on the ground engagement that Khadija talked about. There's also a moral conviction that the Urban League has linked up for generations with Dr. King. And why this is so important. Speak to that in terms of what you as an organization are connecting with and feeling from your members, please.
First of all, I want to thank Kevin, and I was sending him some private messages. When I tell you we are on top of what's going on in the Commonwealth, and also I sent some messages to Senator Casey because I get day-to-day updates on what's going on the Hill, what Schumer's doing, what they're doing. So I appreciate that. I want to agree with Khadija on several things that she said. So we had 18 people out today. And Todd, remember, I wasn't being a smarty pants, but I said, although I was at the Kimmel Center, I saw you when you were sneaking out because you had to come and do this. I said to the young people when I left, "What did you register anybody?" And they said, "No." I said, "You're not going to register anybody at the Kimmel Center because it's going to be people like Todd, people like Andrea, because these are people who vote." And I said, "I don't want my people there. I want my people to be working like, I don't know what, grassroots, getting out there, getting the work done." So we were in 3 sites, and I understand, Senator Hughes, you just showed off up at Parkside. I can tell you what you had on, what you said, and whatever. I heard you were a show off, that you were the showstopper. So we were at Monument, at Fresh Grocer, we were at ShopRite, and then we were at 52nd and Market. 57 and Market was difficult because it was all outside. It was really cold, really windy. So we even let some of them go a little bit earlier. Parkside and Monument were absolutely fine. We registered probably about 40 people today. One of the things, and I don't mean to be mean, but one of the things when we're doing voting, and I'm real serious, it's about registering people. I don't have time for the social activity and the social conversations. You can have it with the people that you're talking to, but not the chit chat among people. I would tell you the number one area right now where Mark Morial is absolutely focused, and there's nothing more important. If I showed you half the stuff I get, the social media kits and whatever, is all about the voter suppression. We don't have to worry about anything else if we don't get this right. If we don't get these bills in, and if we don't stop this voter suppression, already 11 states and probably about 30 else are on the list. I get to hear from the other 90 affiliates, the sisters and brothers that are out there every day, with Nancy there, with Stacey Abrams to do it. So this is really serious work. And so some of the messages today, and we have some work to do, and Senator Hughes, I'll talk to you one-on-one on some of that. And so I'm gonna ask everybody, take a deep breath. My thing is always take constructive feedback and whatever. But when we were out there today, people said to us, about 8 out of 10, so listen to me, what are you talking about voting? Voting for what? We just had the presidential election. They are clueless. So let me say it again. That's a reflection on here. I'm gonna take total accountability, and everybody else. They do not understand that there is an election on May 17th and who we're voting for, why we're voting, and all of that. They were very clear, like Senator Hughes, some of them brought up when we did the motorcade. They brought up when it was Councilman Jones and all of us were out there. They got it, they were part of it. We turned it out with everything that we did. Every little event and everything we did. I'm gonna tell you right now, we've got to all sit down, and it's got to be a serious plan, because they don't know there is an election. They don't. I've got some work to do. And Omar, I'm coming after you and a couple of other people. I know I can take care of my own reentry people, but the people who have been incarcerated do not know that they are able to vote. Let me say it again. Now, we had people there who were registering people who were part of our program who have been incarcerated, right? They're part of our Out for Good and Ready to Work. So they know it. And when they were telling the brothers that, and that was up in Parkside, Senator Hughes, they were like, oh, we didn't know we could vote. Oh, we didn't know that. So we've got work to do on that. We've got work to do on that there is an election, what it is, why it is. Let's make it real simple. I say, KISS, keep it simple and stupid. Let's not make this all complicated when we're talking to the Black community and getting it. The young people, and don't let's, and I almost apologize for it, and I'm not going to waste all my time. I cannot waste all my time when I'm talking to the brothers, and I get it, that are talking about drilling. Drilling is a Chicago thing when you ride around and you decide who you're going to kill. And that's what we're doing here now. We're trying to beat Chicago on drilling. So I don't have any time. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to talk about, then you go right on, because I don't have time for you. I do have time for the young brothers that still don't understand, that are still complaining, because they're like, well, the young brothers are saying, I ain't got no job. What you got for me? So you want me to vote, but I don't have no job. I don't have anything. So what do you want? And there's a lot of them. Please don't ignore them. They are in masses in these communities. They are large. The other piece is that I'm working with, I'm going to be working with both, and I love them, both generals, president generals at community college. We worked with him last year. We brought the actual, the voting booths in there, remember, because they were new, right? And he let me turn it out. We had like a little party. We got so many people registered to vote. We made it fun. He just gave me the full day. So I'm back with him to get that. I'm also talking to Dr. Height, right? Because we see 2,000 or 3,000 students. So we're working with Dr. Height because we've got to get those high school seniors. We have to get them. And I'll give you my opinion. I don't think it's going to be, and I know I'm crazy, but I don't think it's going to be that difficult if I go through him to get those high school seniors. I think if you try to go get them on your own, I think they're going to be like talking to what you talking to me about? What? So I think it'll be more difficult. The good news is, and this is why I love my seniors, they make me cry. The good news is the seniors at all 3 locations, most of them were registered to vote. They had been voting, they understand. They even knew a little bit about like the mail-in and the ballot boxes. They said they were confused in the beginning, but we did a lot to teach them. Positive story from your seniors. So we need to use some of that as grandmama talking to Missy over here or talking to Mr. over here. And I do agree. And Senator Hughes, just lastly, if you remember when we were talking about COVID and the sisters who were on there who were doctors, one of the things they said, and I agreed with, and I came back, I'm getting ready to do a PSA, is, and that's what Khadija said also, young people can talk to young people sometimes better than somebody else can talk to them. So we're going to use that. I'm going to use that for a PSA for voting and put it on where they listen to. So I think we have, I'm like, if you-
Andrea, quick question, Andrea, just to build on that. That's the trusted messenger piece that Khadija was talking about. That's the trusted messenger piece that Khadija was talking about. But let me ask you this, because one of the questions that came in up in the chat is, can people volunteer with the Urban League, or can people volunteer with the New Pennsylvania Project? Or
I need hundreds of people. I
So-
need thousands of people. And Todd, I'm telling you, there were people there that were on your team. I already recruited them. The little short white girl, I forget her name, Debbie, whatever it is, she getting ready to come over. She was like, yeah, I'll work with you. So I'm just telling you, I will steal shamelessly from all of you that we get the people. And so anybody who wants to volunteer, we have tons of work for them to do. And we
can you
want,
put your website in the chat?
okay.
Okay. And Khadija, can you put the website in the chat? Okay.
Absolutely. And I'm gonna also throw in here, I got swag to give away. Like we got
I
buttons,
gave swag.
we got sweatshirts,
Me
right?
too.
Like, come on and volunteer. We got it to
Here's
give
the
away.
other thing, Khadija, they love. Let's have food. When you give food, people come. Food and swag. We brought hundreds of bags today with all kind of swag. We certainly did. Hundreds of them. I agree with you. And when you give food, I'm gonna follow you too. I'll go ahead and register and help you.
Folks, if you have questions, put them in the chat. All right. If you have questions, put them in the chat so we can get them read off and try to get some answers here. We're very, very, very interested in trying to respond to anything and trying to generate activism. This Dr. King laid out obviously the moral responsibility that we all have to be engaged and to be involved. We also have, it is in some respects, a transactional responsibility. You know, you vote for our interests, you know, and we'll respond to those policies. And your vote does matter. Things can change. I'll try not to be too historical on this while you put folks put your questions in the chat. But you know, some of you may remember about 8 years or so ago, there was a gubernatorial election in Pennsylvania, and the previous guy that was governor didn't want to implement the Affordable Care Act. In fact, went to court to try to challenge it. And he served one term. First time there was ever a governor in Pennsylvania that served one term and was turned out after one term because he did not want to put the Affordable Care Act into place. The next governor came in, that would have been Governor Wolf, and within 3 months, the Affordable Care Act was fully implemented in Pennsylvania. And since then, close to 1 million people have gotten health insurance as a result of the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. There is a direct connection between participation and progress. Participation and progress. There's a direct connection there. And not only did folks get access to high quality and affordable health insurance, but the number one cause for bankruptcies in this nation was the inability to afford health care. Well, that was addressed. And then, all right, a new person assumed the office of the presidency, attempted to gut the Affordable Care Act. The cost for health insurance skyrocketed. Election happened, and believe it or not, President Biden was elected. There was no steal. President Biden was elected, put in the American Rescue Plan. Health insurance is now much more affordable, much more expansive to folks. And so there is, and health insurance has been a big issue for me over the generations, over the years that I've been working on this. There is a direct connection between who's elected and the services that are provided. I think Commissioner Sabir talked about it, you know, so succinctly on that. And there's a question of the Pennsylvania constitutional amendments that Ms. Kenner discussed listed on her website. Khadija, have you put up those constitutional amendments on your website?
So they're on another website that I've been involved with. It's the JIPA table, Judicial Independence Project of Pennsylvania. So it's judicialindependencepa.org. I'll put that in the chat. You can learn more about House Bill 38. You can learn more about their attempts to gerrymander the judiciary, their attempts to have the sham redistricting commission. The other bills, 1880, I talked about the limiting terms. of the current sitting judges, and then 2141, which is the change in the way in which we have retention elections for judges versus an all-out re-election campaign for judges. Those don't exist right now. These are things that we'll be adding to our website soon. These are some of the issues to talk about when we talk about democracy issues, voting rights issues. We'll put those up. But if you do want to visit our website, you can see the issues that we have up there for now. I'll add these there, and I'll put them in the chat box too, so you can, do some homework for those who are really interested. But I want to highlight that this is a growing trend, right? When we have $7 billion with a B sitting in a rainy day fund in Harrisburg that was given to us by the federal government, which was our tax dollars, right? Given to us to help us get through this global pandemic, but it sits there. And the current GOP-led legislature refuses to spend this money on the people to help us make sure that our lives are better. So when I say I'm knocking on doors and talking to people, and they're saying my life is not changing for the better, well, their life could be better if we could actually have access to the $7 billion that was allocated to us here in Pennsylvania to help our lives be better. So that is something that's of note. And the other thing that we have to be very cautious of is that as we are Pennsylvania, the birthplace of American democracy, what happens here will not stay here. If this becomes the trend where we are trying to go around the governor's powers and his veto pen by passing legislation by ballot referendum, again, to only 22% of the people who show up for these particular elections, they try to get this on the ballot for, we are in trouble. We're at this point since 1996, we have said yes to every single ballot referendum question that has come across our ballots in the Commonwealth. And if we think we can fight these ballot referendum questions, that will be a challenge on our end. We're just trying to get folks to the polls. As Andrea has mentioned, folks have no idea that there was an election. We were knocking doors in September and October for the November election. People had no idea there was an election just last November, 2021. They thought the yard signs were up from the previous 2020 election. They had no idea. There's so much education that needs to be done in the Commonwealth, and it is an institutional failure on our part to not educate folks about the importance of our elections and remind everyone that we vote twice a year, every year in the Commonwealth.
Well, thanks, Khadija. Looking at one of the questions in the chat, it is the issue of long lines, and there were some long lines in the primary election in 2020 in Cobbs Creek. That question has come up in the chat, but not so much in Roxborough. If I remember my timing correctly, all of the early voting stuff took effect in the general election in November of 2020. We did push back the primary date in 2020, but all of the early voting stuff took place in the general election in 2020. The threat that's happening right now is that the act, which was bipartisan in nature, that created early voting, is threatened to be overturned by the Republicans in Pennsylvania, even though they voted for it back in to allow it to go in place in 2020. They're now talking about getting rid of the whole thing. And that's because we firmly believe that's because turnout was so high and so heavily used by the electorate that they wanted it. One of the questions that we want to try to achieve is state funding for those those community voter centers that were set up in the 2020 cycle that were paid for by a private foundation. You all remember those, where you could go into the community and cast your vote early and get your ballot answers to your voter registration form asked and whatever. They were all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Counties could opt in for that. Lots of counties did, but there were a significant number of counties that chose not to. We're now talking about trying to find state dollars to help establish those and get those set up all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. That's something that I'm personally interested in because they were so accessible and they made so much good sense. So folks should keep in mind those kinds of things as well. Another piece that I like folks to be mindful of, the notion of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Khadija kind of hit on this, the notion that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is tight financially and does not have the funds to pay for a lot of these voting initiatives. that notion is out the door. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is flush with cash, a significant amount from the American Rescue Plan that has not been spent, another amount that's sitting in the state's rainy day fund, and it's raining on people already. And the fact that the state's economy is growing, and consequently, there's a budget surplus developing in the Pennsylvania economy. So, long story short, don't make it too complicated. There are budget surplus dollars that can be utilized to pay for a lot of these voting related initiatives. All right. We don't have to go to other sources to get the funding. We can fund them out of state budget surpluses because the state's budget coffers are doing so well. Think about that. Think about utilizing tax dollars for part tax dollars, how we contribute to the funding of our democracy to actually pay for the voting process to make it easier for folks to vote. Think about that. And that is something that we need to be in the business of advocating for. Todd, do you see any other questions? Are there any points you want to make sure that we get to? We're about 6 minutes left in this conversation. Is there any points that you want me to make sure that we get addressed or raised?
Senator, I just, we've been discussing some of the ways that we can get involved with all the people that are on this Zoom. If there are any other folks that are engaged in organizational efforts to promote voting, to fight voter suppression, if you could put those in the chat, because not everyone lives in Philadelphia. There are so many different organizations at the grassroots level, and then there are organizations like the Urban League and Kadita's organization, but there are many ways that we can do this. And frankly, and I would say that as we come to a conclusion, we're putting such a strong emphasis on voter registration and education, which is so important. But it is a wasted exercise if people don't get out there and actually vote. That is an often heard refrain, but it's just fact. If you look at the Commonwealth, when I worked for Senator Harris Wofford back in the 90s, you had turnouts from Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and other progressive areas that could take candidates over the top. That we learned from the 2016 election, that there was an awakened giant in the Alabama in between, as a friend of ours once said. So this is serious business, and we can't afford to rely on other people to do it for us. And frankly, when we get in that voting booth, it doesn't end there. It's got to continue beyond that, and we've got to be engaged. And we look at Dr. King's legacy. We look to him for guidance. Dr. King was a man of action 365 days of the year. If we really want to embrace his legacy, we've got to be doing this again and again and again.
Thanks, Todd. Folks should, at the state level, folks should pay attention to the legislation that was just introduced by House Democratic leader Joanna McClinton, the K. Leroy Ervis Voting Rights Act, and the K. Leroy Ervis Voting Rights Protection Act, the K. Leroy Ervis Voting Rights Protection Act, which is a comprehensive piece of legislation and I'll quote from her website, "We should be restoring faith in our elections, promoting options for safe and secure voting, easing the burden on local election officials by allowing for 21 days of pre-canvassing and ensuring that every voice is heard." Folks should go to Representative McClinton's website where you can find out the details on that, pahouse.com/McClinton, pahouse.com/McClinton. That is an important piece of legislation that we can be advocating for here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in addition to other pieces that a number of folks have introduced that talks about automatic registration, the whole notion of paying for voting centers in communities all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There's a lot of conversation that's happening there. And I would say as we're approaching time, as there is a bit of a, as I said, invest in or transactional conversation with, the more you vote, the more you get, as Commissioner Sabir would say, and that's real and that's necessary. And it's just a functional part of our system. But I also think that we must all additionally talk about the moral obligation that all of us have to engage in this thing that is the fundamental part of our democracy. We are literally witnessing, I'm gonna breathe on this, literally witnessing the greatest retrenchment in voting rights and the opportunity to participate in democracy that we've seen probably since post-Reconstruction. What we're seeing state by state, community by community, county by county, all kinds of laws to suppress the vote, laws that will change who decides, who is the arbiter on local election decisions that used to be done by nonpartisan election officials. Are now those laws are being changed across the country to make those decisions done in a partisan fashion. We have a moral obligation to beat those initiatives back. We beat them back by participating. We beat them back by engaging. We beat them back by registering and then going out and voting. We beat them back by making sure that our communities and our family members, from the oldest of the old, the ones that have never missed a vote in the 50 to 60 years that they've been voting, to the youngest of the young who've not had the opportunity to vote, to make sure that they're educated about their responsibility to this process and to this democracy. If we don't have the vote, we've lost it all. And it's being beaten back community by community across this country. It is our responsibility, while we still have the opportunity to defend it and protect it, that we advance democracy. And all of these options are available to us. And it is up to us, everyone in this conversation, to be now the vanguards for getting involved. Make that phone call, 202-224-3121. Call your senator. Call any senator. All right, call any senator across the country and tell them you want the John Lewis Act and the Voting Rights Act passed and become law. Go to votespa.com here in Pennsylvania. Register to vote. You can do it right now. Most of the folks on this call are already registered, okay? Educate someone else and show them how to do it. There's elections every 6 months in Pennsylvania and just about every community across the country. These things matter. They matter. They are important. And if we say we love Dr. King, if we say we want to live out his dream, we must embrace this conversation and this action about voting in this state and in this nation. Todd, we're at 4:32.
Yep.
You're the boss. You close us out, sir.
Pardon. Well, couldn't say it any better than you. I want to thank Senator Casey, Commissioner Sabir, Kadita, Vince, and all the other folks who contributed, Kevin Greenberg, Andre Custis. We know the mission ahead, and it's got to go forth in a way that we can appeal and partner with many of the folks who are on this call, who are leaders in this field. So keep the faith. Call those numbers, call your senators, and let's move forward. And I just want to thank everyone for being engaged on King Day today, but to be able to really make change, we've got to do it every day. So thank you, everyone. And let's move forward.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Todd.
you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Kadita.
Talk to you later.
Yeah, you know you will.